Hey, everybody, and welcome to Prepper Talk Radio with Scott, Shane, and Paris. And it is National Preparedness Month at the time that we're recording this. So you're listening wherever you are, whenever you are. You know, it should be National Preparedness Month for you, Personal Preparedness Month every month. But right now it's national. So I want to remind you guys to take advantage of all the sales, all the deals. If you've got some money stocked up, if you got stuff you're not using, sell it so you got money, take the money, turn around. A lot of great deals right now this month. One of those is our good friends over at AMP3. That's amp-3.net. They're giving our listeners, basically anyone with a code, 15% off at checkout. And that's Prepper Talk. Prepper Talk, just one word, get you 15% off. I love the first aid kits. I'm actually going to be buying another one here next month, adding it to my kids' kits that I keep in the car. Awesome. Without further ado, we're gonna flash flood on you. So we are gonna do one of our educational series podcasts tonight, all about floods. And what's great about that is we know at the very last of almost every show, we get a flash flood of knowledge, information, and usually a cliffhanger from Shane. So we're hoping he does that at the beginning rather than the end today.
Pressure is so great.
I know. I like to add pressure. That way the pipes burst.
No, I definitely have some cliffhangers. No, there's no doubt about that. You know, I think obviously when we think of flooding, what's the first thing you think of, right? Noah.
Water. Oh, Noah. Oh, yeah.
Noah, right? Or I should say, who is the first person you think of? Noah, right? So obviously that was different circumstances. This time around, it's going to be by fire. Maybe we should talk about that one of these days. Is that's the way that the world's going to end instead of by flood this time. But
you mean that's the way
there's a lot of lessons to be learned. Yes, okay, and maybe that's what we're seeing, right? Because the reason I wanted to talk about this, or the way I wanted to go with this flooding, is flash flooding. Because in my neck of the woods, and in a lot of people's areas, I think throughout the United States in particular, and I see it all over the world, is a lot of flash floods. Because what we're seeing is 100, 500, maybe even 1,000-year events. Events that are only supposed to happen every 100 to 500 to 1,000 years, but they're happening not just every year, multiple times a year. Maybe not in one particular place, but throughout our state in particular, we've been seeing a lot of flash flooding, more than I can remember. I have seen worse in my lifetime. Back in the 80s, there were some big floods. So that was from snowmelt. I wouldn't call that necessarily a flash flood. Okay, yeah, it probably is. But we've seen these huge storms that will come down and sit over a certain location, and almost entirely unexpected to get a flash flood there. And my thought is, and what I wanted to talk about is, how do we prepare for that? Right? What do we look for? What do you look for if you haven't had a flood in your area before? Because I feel perfectly safe where I'm at. Yet some of my neighbors, their basements were flooded out in one of these last storms. So that's where my mind goes in talking about this, this preparedness series, preparing for a flash flood, being unexpected. What do you look for? How do you prepare? How do you locate in a good area? Or what do you look for to know if you're going to be in a safe area, and so on and so forth? So that's where my brain is.
Awesome.
I had a bunch of social media posts come through my Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, even, of people who I had one I was sharing with my wife last night about a flash flood that happened. I think it was Havasupai or Moab. Anyways, these hikers were literally stuck. They showed ahead of them, and it was like a river, and then behind them, and it was like another river, and they're like, we're just and there was this little alcove that they could sneak into and have a little bit of shelter, but it was a waterfall coming over the alcove for them. And I was like, the good news is the fact that we are watching their video means that they made it out at some point to post that, I hope. But the reality is that whether you're at home or whether you're out enjoying the outdoors, especially during flash flood season, which is typically, right now in those areas, you need to be ready to know what to do. So I want to talk about what Shane and Scott have mentioned already, like in our neighborhoods. But when you're going to go enjoy the outdoors, it's a good idea to kind of get a, look at the weather, the predictions, the weather, like what's happening in that area. Like if you're going to go on a hike in Moab, make sure you've done some research to know if it's, flash flood season. And if it is, make sure you have some preps that you're carrying with you in your backpack as you're doing that, or don't go and just be safe that way too.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the challenge though with like flash floods, like depending on where you are, like in Utah, Nevada, Arizona, like we've got a lot of canyons. And what's interesting is the flood, the rain could be 100 miles away. So you have no idea it's there. But then you get hit with a flash flood. And a few years back, 2014, we had a couple of big ones. I remember there was a car near Las Vegas, a minivan, flash flood hit, but it was raining there. So they should have been a little bit more aware of what's going on around them. It was raining. They got washed right off the road, right off the side berm, all the way into this gutter ditch thing. I think it was the same year. There was a section of I-15 where it was completely washed out and cars were just gone. I heard a story from a guy he was towing a boat. They barely got through before the road behind them just washed out. So being aware of where you are, but also being aware of where you're going and not just what's going on in your little microverse, what's right around you, but know what's going on in the neighboring areas.
Yeah, it'll affect you. Scott, you started out with this is National Preparedness Month. For preppers, it should be National Preparedness Day, hour, minute, right?
Yeah, Personal Preparedness Day.
Exactly, and that's the way it is for me. It's rarely off my mind. So these types of things, like you're saying, Scott, wherever you're going, it should be, at least it is for me. I won't speak for you. For me, it is always on my mind. Okay, checking the weather, making plans, loading the vehicle with the things that I need, going heavy and so forth. So I use a weather app. I wouldn't say every day, but most every day I'm checking the weather, right? You gotta know how you're gonna go, right? You're gonna go heavy, you're gonna go light, you need a jacket and so on and so forth, especially during winter. But and like you say, Paris, this is kind of the heavy, I wouldn't say the monsoon season. I don't think Utah has a monsoon season, but the afternoon storms pop up unannounced. We get a warning through the weather apps, 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes before something big hits. Sometimes a little bit more notice. Oh, look, it's going to rain this afternoon. It always changes in Utah. I can never, and that's one other reason to watch your weathers, to know how it changes, how quickly it changes, and what the weather patterns are for your area. Like where I live, I kind of have it down pat. I know the storms split around us regularly, so when we see a big storm coming in, it splits. But anyway, I use that app on a regular basis, and it makes me excited too, because I love storms. I love to sit out in the thunder and lightning and watch the storms. But that is, we talk about the G.I. Joe, knowing is half the battle. That's where you got to start, right? You got to know your weather patterns, what it's like in your area. If you live there your entire life, that's easy. If you relocated and so on and so forth, that should be, I think, top priority in preparing for a flash flood, getting to know the weather in your area.
Yep. Well, the cool thing is like you can do a lot of things to research your area, being aware of the weather, knowing the high spots, the low spots. You guys know that we all have access to topographical maps now. I'm going to show you something. We're going to share this screen. You guys see that? This is just Google Maps. They now have a terrain option. Cool. I don't know if you guys have played with this. I noticed this a few months ago, and I'm like, woohoo! Click on it, and now it gives me all the topographical lines.
Wow, very cool.
So I can see the low spots, the high spots in my area. This isn't my area, but this is one that has a lot of really cool terrain changes. So you can see, okay, what could happen. I'll zoom out a little bit, and I'm like, okay, huge rainstorm up here where my mouse is. It's going to all come down this canyon. That means it's all going to flood out right here.
Or any of the smaller canyons that are all around it. Any of these little draws, these ravines are going to collect the rain. And if you live below it and you get a 500-year, 1,000-year storm, you're going to be most likely going to be in some danger of getting flooded out.
Exactly. Last night, we actually had a just quick storm. Boom. And dropped enough water in 15 minutes that the manhole covers up and down our street all got popped off.
They're overflowing. Mm-hmm.
They overflowed. The lids popped off. So it doesn't take much to disrupt your life.
Yeah.
And that's why we're talking about this today, is just be aware so that you can actually formulate a plan and be more responsive than reactive.
Yeah, if you could zoom in on your map there, Scott, if you just below the go down a little bit, go south. Okay, see this kind of hillside. Yeah, right there is good. See this entire area where these canyons come out. Most likely there's small streams in there, but nothing kind of a big river. But obviously we go back to Noah when there was a big flood, and a lot of these mountains were washed out. That's where these alluvial fans came from and so forth. And obviously that was more than 1,000 year. That was a couple thousand year type event, right? A once in a world,
an act of God event.
Exactly. Exactly. So, but if you take clues from your terrain here, you can see all of these drainages, which maybe you live in a drainage and there's 1,000 other homes in there as well, and there's no water. At some point in history, water came down and created that low spot, that ravine. And so personally, I like to live on a bench, and I'd live up on the hillside, up on a bench, which is it is a very sturdy bench. It's got river rock, and I forget the terms I was looking for, but essentially it is, I wouldn't say immune from the big floods. For the small flash floods and flooding the basements and so forth, water coming off your roof into your window well, those are the types of things you need to consider if you're in a safe place. But yeah, look what water has done. Look at the map here. This is what water has done for centuries and thousands of years. And if you think, and I think we've learned here in the past weeks, months, years, that there aren't any spots, if I can say this properly, that aren't in danger of potentially being flooded. I mean, if you obviously you live up on a rock, you're probably safe. If you live on the sand, you're not going to be safe, right? There, as the song goes.
The old adage, right? The wise man built his house upon the rock for a reason. Right. So you've got bedrock where you live. I've got bedrock where I live. Like I'm on granite, my foundation. And so that gives some security. But yeah, we still get flooding into our house because of the way the hill slopes.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been able
the water comes up from there. Yeah.
Water always looks for the path of least resistance and takes it. So if there's a low spot or gully, that's where it's going to collect. If that's close to your home, guess what? Your foundation's in trouble. And so that's what we're going to kind of drill into.
Yeah, and the overall contours of the land that is above you. Say, for example, is there a parking lot that is above you that has a sump or some kind of drain? What happens when that gets backed up? It gets plugged. Water overflows, and it goes where it's not expected to go, into the closest house's basement, right? So those are the kind of things that I would recommend you looking for if you're not familiar with your surroundings. What is upstream from you? How does the water flow off of other people's properties, right? A permitted home is supposed to be graded so that the water slopes away from the house, but it's sloping from your neighbor's house towards your house. And so there are some things to look very closely at. Like, give you an example, my neighbor's house who flooded, we had no idea this was going to happen whatsoever. It didn't come off the parking lot that was above the property. It came off of multiple homes, properties that were uphill of this house. And there was so much rain that it was just too much. And it was completely unexpected. And I'm sure this homeowner did not have flood insurance. Like you're saying, Scott, earlier, if you have homeowners insurance, your only what happens inside the home is covered. Like if you have a leaky pipe or so forth, something like that would be covered by homeowners insurance. If it comes in from outside of the house, you need to have a separate policy just for flood insurance, which I would suspect the vast majority of people don't have.
Yeah, and most don't. And the thing about flood insurance, though, is it's not going to cover the same as what your house does. And so there are things you can do, whether you have a policy or not, that can help better make you more resilient. Number one, I always tell everybody to do this. go look to see if they're in a flood area or not. If they're in an area that's had flooding within the last 500 years, definitely get flood insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Then most likely your mortgage company will require flood insurance if you're in an obvious flood zone.
Yeah, if you're in a flood zone that's had 100-year flood or more frequent, you're going to be required. You can go to mcs.fema.gov/portal/search, and you can actually see the different flood zone areas around your home. You can pop in your address, find out if you're in a crisis area, or when you actually buy your home, it'll tell you, hey, you have to have insurance because you're in a flood zone, right? And depending on where you live, the prices are going to be different, but you can start with the FEMA website to see the resources. But aside from that, like, there are things you can do, like waterproofing your basement, raising your the access points to your basement so that water doesn't get in through like window wells, right? Raising the window wells and creating a more secure, harder way for things to get in. Just like you don't want bad guys to break through your windows, you definitely don't want water to seep through your windows.
Right. If you have high groundwater, or if the water raises from a flood, it's going to seep in very slowly into your basement. But the most damage will come through your windows, through any basement doors. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Scott. Is sandbags strategically placed around window wells, around basement entries, would have stopped this neighbor's flooding completely, but it was completely unknown. I mean, it's absolute surprise, this flash flood.
That's one of the things I've thought of for years. I'm like, okay, where do you put, if you have sandbags, where do you put them when you're not using them? Because a lot of people, they'll use them, then they'll get rid of them. And I'm like, you've got these huge window wells and nobody looks down in your window well all the time. So why not store a bunch of those bags right there? That's a perfect place to put them. And then when you know, most of the time you'll know that the storm's coming. If the storm's coming, pull them out, set them where they need to be, reinforce.
Maybe especially in windows that are not, a bedroom or something, because that might be a very boring view to be looking out.
I'm not saying window well. No. Spread them out, keep them low, because you're not going to need, depending on where your house is, most likely you're not going to need sandbags around the whole home. Right. It's just enough to divert the water away from the home, and that's what you're trying to do. Keep the water away from the home.
Speaking of that, did you ever see that guy that had like I think it was a flood in Missouri somewhere, and he had like this inflatable all the way around his house, like on his property, and it was kind of the joke was like, who's laughing now, And the other thing was, I think that they, on their driveway, they actually even had a platform that would raise up so he could pop the thing and that would raise the car up higher than the water so they didn't lose the car. And it was just this cool, like, I mean, of course, that's tens of thousands of dollars potentially to have your home that retrofitted. But man, those are some fun. There are some things out there that you can really do especially if you're in an area that has more regular flooding.
And there's
retrofit your house.
Yeah, there's some simple things you can do. First of all, know the elevation difference from, say, your sidewalk, where the gutter is, where the water's supposed to go down the sidewalk, down the gutter to the next storm drain. Know the elevation difference between your sidewalk and where your window wells are, where water would go into your house, and prepare with enough sandbags to give you more elevation, depending on how much there is. I've got about 3 feet. So I've got quite a bit, and water will really run down our street like a river, over and go over the sidewalk, but we're still about 25, 30 feet from the house at that point. And then the backside is downhill, so we're safe that way as well. So we really haven't had any threats that way. I think most small flooding incidents come from downspouts being in the wrong place, and then that flooding basement windows and so forth. So it's definitely a good idea to have a sump pump on hand. Go down to your Harbor Freight store. They're fairly inexpensive, $60, $70, $80, depending on the size, and have that ready. So if your window wall starts to fill up and you're not prepared, you can jump on that right away and get the water away from your house.
Yeah, I have a sump pump for the very reason. I actually got it to drain my above ground swimming pool, but thankfully had it, and had it been available for a couple of times when I mistakenly left the water on and filled up my it was my own fault that the last couple of times that I've put water in my window well was because I didn't turn the hose off. But it's nice to have that sump pump to be able to get that water out of there, that extra water out of there fast.
Other cool things you can get. Have you guys seen these water diversion tubes? You can actually, it's like a sandbag, but you just fill it with water.
Yeah.
And you can put those around your home. There's even ones where they're just complete dry. They're called pigs. It's just completely a dry little black, looks like felt tube. And it's actually got a coagulant inside that when water hits it, it absorbs it and blocks the water from getting through it.
Interesting.
Great little stuff. There's a lot of different things you can do. That's for light flooding. But these these diversion tubes that you can fill with water, it's like a sandbag, but it only helps for like 12 inches. So if you've got a bigger issue, you need to make sure you have sandbags because you can make walls of those things, right?
And they make great bullet stops as well.
Oh, that's a great point.
Nothing like Earth to stop bullets.
So we talked about sandbags. We talked about water tubes. So exterior flooding, issues like that. Make sure also, way before a flood happens, way before you have issues, to inventory everything you have in your home. Make sure right now to double check all your downspouts. Regular maintenance on your home, you should be clearing out the rain gutters. You should be clearing out the downspouts. That'll stop backflows. That'll stop water pooling right around your house. Make sure they're diverted at least 8 feet away from the house and downhill, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Check to make sure the soil around your home is compacted and that there's watershed away from the house, meaning there's a pitch away. The water, if it's staying right by your house, it's going to seep down into your foundation and it can get through below. And if you've got a bad foundation, it can get through the wall too. Seepage takes a long time, but I've seen it happen.
I was just going to say, when I moved to Utah, that was something that was really kind of wild to me because my downspout, I think there's 4 of them in my house in each one of the corners, but then they had this long, like 6 to 10 foot tube that would take the water from the downspout out into the yard. And I was like, what are these for? And then I realized, wait a minute, it actually rains in Utah. And in California, it was like a rainstorm was like once every, I think I lived there for 10 years and had, probably 3 or half a dozen, maybe really good rainstorms. And I've already been living in Utah for 3 years. And just the other day, there was a huge thunderstorm and it was like number 15 this year, Yeah.
Right?
So the point is that I recognized that this was a really good, that one of my problems, the first time I flooded my basement was because I had when I mowed the lawn, I moved that 6 foot tube closer to the property so that I could get over the grass. And then there was a rainstorm and that was the first time I flooded. So I realized the reason why you have those out into your yard so that you don't flood yourself. And then, but that was something that was wild to me, knowing your area. And everybody that I know of has them here in my area anyways, that all my neighbors have them too. So that's something to really think about. If you live in an area where there's high levels of rain or potential flooding. I mean, we just in Utah, we had up in Ogden, wasn't there some huge in the streets even? There was like 4 or 5 inches of water just through the streets up in northern Utah. And there's a whole area that flooded. And one of the people showed on social media, they were down in the basement and the water was coming through the window and eventually burst the window. So if you're having a flooding issue and you're in the middle of it, of course, after the floods arrived and you're in the middle of it, stay away from those windows, because if they pop or burst from that pressure on the water, you're not going to want to be anywhere near that.
Well, you brought up a good point there, Parrish, is that, you think about Utah. Utah is the second driest state in the nation, next to Nevada. And so I think most people don't expect there to be a lot of rain. But when there is, it can be devastating, right? So even in our super dry climate, flooding is and has been a big issue. And so what you got to look, as kind of I was saying, you look at the terrain, everything around you, but we kind of rely on the developers, the cities that we live in, to have already planned for this, right? Because they have storm drains, they have detention basins for these 100-year, 500-year floods. But it seems like those systems are getting overwhelmed, or they're not maintained well enough that they're not cleaned, so they back up. And so don't leave it up to the city or the developer who built your subdivision to make sure he got it right, because I've seen plenty of examples this year alone of where entire apartment complexes, the basement or the lower level is halfway full of water.
Yep.
Now, who was the genius who approved that subdivision, right? The city, the developer, and who looked upstream to where this water could potentially come from. Again, we live in Utah, a super dry place. It's not expected, but that's what you got to plan for most, is what is not expected. And that's what us preppers are all about. I mean, again, speaking for myself, and that's why I think we get called conspiracy theorists a lot. You know, we've been proven right on most things, but we look for those things that are least expected, and but still have a fairly high likelihood of happening. And so this is, I think, really right up our alley for everyone to be, their eyes to be open and looking, examining the terrain where you live and see, okay, what could possibly happen? Because if you're out in a flat area, I'm not so experienced with that as living on hillsides and, where I'm at now, as to where water could come from. But if you're on the flat and it floods, where's that water going to go?
Yep. That's like 1992 or 93. I don't remember the year. The Mississippi was flooding, and like everywhere, central United States was just devastated with water, just tons and tons of water. One of the areas we went to go see was it's all these apple orchards, beautiful view. We get out there and it's a lake. Like they were 5 feet underwater. So what's interesting, I mean, we did this whole road trip and there were places we had to completely be diverted. We couldn't use the bridges because they were taking so much side pressure from the overflow of water that they couldn't allow vehicles to drive over them. Right. So being aware of those things, was that a good idea to travel during that week? Probably not. But parents did it anyways. But looking at what's likely to happen, where you are and where you're going, but then also having a plan of action to be able to take care of it during. Like if you haven't reinforced your home, haven't reinforced the exterior to make sure that the water's not going to come in as well, right? Haven't raised, take all of your important documents, keep them off the floor, keep them up first level or higher, put them in waterproof containers, right? Yes. Food storage, everything that you normally stuff in a basement, if you've got a basement, or on the first floor or on the ground, elevate it if you can, or put it in watertight containers, right? Prevention is going to be the key.
You mentioned something earlier,
Scott. I told you about earlier, like inventorying everything, keep that watertight and out of the way.
Scott, you mentioned something earlier, kind of in passing, that there was roads that were getting washed out, and that's something that if you're driving, I know for sure that in Yellowstone a couple years ago, there was a huge flood and half the highway got washed out and you couldn't even drive and people were stuck back in those areas. That's true in California. There was some flooding this last year and there were full-blown roads completely, cut in half, huge, as the water would come rushing through, it would go under and it would wash all the dirt and then the asphalt falls and you don't have a road anymore for a little while. So, there's some real dangers that can happen if you're not prepared or not ready for that. So that's something also to, I think, to be aware of. One other thing, and I think we might talk about this if we have time, but you mentioned earlier that sometimes flooding can happen from broken pipes, like in our homes and stuff. So, for sure, if that happens in your home, you're going to want to know where your main shutoff valves are. So there's the one at the street and then there's the one in the house. And so thankfully the room I'm in right now actually has the one in the house. So the main shutoff valve is actually right behind me on the wall here. And there's a little panel thing that I open up and I can shut the thing down. And that's something that was new to me when I moved to Utah too. I was like, wait a minute, I didn't have a water shutoff valve in my house back in California. I knew where the main was out at the street, but I didn't realize that having a shutoff valve in my house was something that was that was a thing. And so just know that as well. I feel like that's important. Like if something's happening in your house, know how to shut off the water to your house so that you can get that taken care of and it doesn't make any more damage than needed.
Well, that's some other dangers of flooding as well is, sewage backup as well. And just how nasty it can be to clean that up, and having, some muck boots, some rubber boots, having the gloves and tools and such for cleanup, fans, vacuums, shop vacs, wet vacs. Those is something we've been using here in the, for the neighbors here in the past couple of weeks. But another thing that I wanted to just say that you kind of brought up, Paris, is roads getting washed out. This happens so very, very quickly that I've seen plenty of videos. I'm sure you've seen them as well, where drivers, they end up crashing into a washed out road, or, where the culvert that went under the road has been completely washed out and the car drops into it, and just not driving through floodwaters. I've got 4-wheel drives. I'm pretty confident in driving through, puddles and so forth. It's still not a great idea. You don't know what's in the water, how much the road has been washed out underneath the water, what kind of debris is in there. I've seen large rocks come down my street from previous previous rainstorms and floods. We live just below a canyon with quite an extensive water collection diversion system that the city and county has worked on over the years. We still get mud down our street during heavy rains, no matter what they continue to do to improve and upgrade this water diversion to coming off the mountain. As you know, above me, I've got this huge 12,000 foot mountain just a mile from me is where the trailhead starts. And when storms sit there, it can be really bad. So that's something I always keep in mind. But I love having a 4-wheel drive as well. That way it can help get you out of these types of situations. So that's one of my recommendations as well. Have a capable vehicle.
I think what you just said too, Shane, just a minute ago about the different tools that you can have afterwards for cleanup. Thankfully, when the 2 times that I flooded my basement, that goes right into the carpet and it goes into the padding, and you can have mold really quickly, and black mold and dangerous mold can form there unless you aerate it really well. And I went to Costco and I bought one of those high-powered fans, and I pulled up the carpet, and I really have a vacuum cleaner that sucks up water. So there's some tools that you can have that are good to have on hand for emergency preparedness. If you've got everything else that you need, and you have a few extra dollars sitting around, go get yourself a good fan, a good blower of some kind to be able to blow over those areas, because you do not want to let that water sit on your carpet and your padding, because it will create a more dangerous situation down the road if you don't.
And it always feels nice to have the right tools to go help your neighbors as well,
Yeah. Because I probably spent an hour sucking water out of the carpet. And then even after that, I was, had that blower running. I think we had the blower running for at least 2, maybe 3 days. And the reason why is because I could still kind of smell that damp smell. Once the damp smell was gone, we opened the windows. We had we had a really good big fan, a really industrial strength one. And then we had a couple of the, little house fans. And thankfully we did it sufficiently. I hope. Who knows? We'll see if there's mold in a couple more months, but so far so good. So just having those tools on hand is really been, and my neighbor actually came over the other day, and he got a hole in his swimming pool or something, above ground swimming pool. He's like, "Hey, Paris, do you still have that sump pump?" I said, "Sure do." And I was able to give it to him, and thankfully he gave it back to me in time for me to use it for my basement. But it's nice to be able to have tools like that to share and be a good resource for your neighbors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, guys, thanks for listening today. Thank you for helping yourself by getting better prepared. If you have questions, comments, or want to add to the conversation, definitely jump in in our group. Let us know what you think. It's linked off our website, preppertalkradio.com. We've also got some other resources over there. But it being National Preparedness Month or Personal Preparedness Day for you, make sure you head on over to amp-3.net. use that code PrepperTalk, save 15%. But also, nobody likes someone who's hangry. When a disaster hits and it's lasting a little bit more than 25 minutes, put some meat in you, put some food in you, get something going, and head on over to our friends over at survivalfrog.com. They have some fantastic, completely cooked. It's not freeze dried. It's cooked and ready to eat meat. Fantastic deals going on over there right now, and you can use the code PrepperTalk to get anything on their site wide for an additional 10% off. We hope you guys have a wonderful day, month, year, or wherever you are, what's going on. I hope it's fantastic and that you're ready-minded. Stay tuned for our next episode. We drop these twice a week. And in the meantime, stay focused, stay ready-minded. Have a good night.
See you next week.
Take care, guys.